Good morning. Today is the 22nd day of Tevis, the 3rd of January. And we're continuing with Mitzvat Kiddush Hashem, Sanctifying God. And last time we talked about Ikimcha Mekol Chaim, a very famous teaching in Chabad. It's repeated many, many times, that the verse says, with you is the source of life. Not that you are the source of life, but with you is the source of life. And this is the illusion. It's only an illusion. It's not a proof. But understand that we need some kind of statement to base everything on. So this is the one that's based on. It's from Psalms 36. So why does King David say, with you is the source of life, and not you are the source of life? Because with you means that it's removed from him. He holds the source of life in him. And the source of life is what we call our life, the life that we feel in our veins, in our continents, in our being, is called the light that fills all worlds. It's what we call the integrated light, the memale. Okay? And it depends, and it depends on how the receiver of this divine effluence is. So if the body's not well, because the person didn't take care of it or something happened, whatever it is, so obviously he's not going to feel as much life as when the body is well. And it is in any case b'chinat tafel u'kelo chashiv etzlo yitbarach. And he himself, God himself, what we call God himself, which here, again, even the words God himself, we can't talk about God himself. We speak about that which we cannot perceive. So that which we cannot perceive, for him, for that aspect of God, the aspect that gives life, is much lower, and it's inordinately lower. So it's like tafil. It's almost like it doesn't matter at all.
Lower in what respect? Lower in
the fact that it takes into consideration creation, meaning that it's not the way that God would give it himself. It depends on what the receiver is able to receive. Because if you think about God as giving, so it's not giving. It's only giving an iota. והיא בבחינת ביטול, כשמכיר האמת, איך שאין עוד, והוא למעלה מן השכל הגלוי, ולזאת תהיה בה התלבשות אור אינסוף. And all this means that in wisdom, we have this, the way that the infinite can come down. That's why the wisdom is called the Reshit. It's called the beginning. So the wisdom is where the infinite light can actually dwell. Only in wisdom. מה שאין כן בינה, השגת הדבר באור ורוחב ובחינת יש, ואין בהתגלות אור אינסוף כל כך שהוא למעלה מהשגה. But when you come to understanding, the second sphira, the second intellectual sphira, there all you have is a very limited form of light that has already been emanated to the wisdom. The wisdom received it at first, the infinite, and again, it only receives some aspect of God's infinite. It can't receive all of the infinite, but it receives some aspect. I'll give you an example of this. One of the strongest examples is that the sfirot also correspond. One of the ways we can use the sfirot is to understand human knowledge. So this is called the Torah Academy. So if you take all the areas of human knowledge, and you correspond them to the Sfirot, what you see is the wisdom is mathematics, and Bina, understanding, is the physical sciences, what they call the exact sciences. In mathematics, you can deal with infinity. Right? In mathematics, there's a whole. It used to be simple. Then Cantor came along in the late 19th century. And he built a whole system of dealing with levels of infinity. Aleph 0, Aleph 1, Aleph 2, Aleph 3. And he used Aleph because he was Jewish, apparently. I think he was either Jewish or his father was Jewish, something like that. And he knew that Aleph stood for Ein Sof, for the infinite. That's how it's used. That's how it's designated in mathematics. Levels of infinity. Someone might ask, how could there be levels of infinity? How could that possibly be? Well, one simple way of thinking about it is these are not levels. Okay, and we'll continue. Sorry for that. So in mathematics, you have levels of infinity. So how can you get one example of it? These are not levels, but they're not really the cardinal numbers, but they're an idea about it. Imagine from 0 to infinity, right? All the numbers, all the integers. There's a lot of them. But now imagine that I also add the negative numbers. So it was infinite in one direction, it's also infinite in the other. It turns out that this is the same level of infinity. But even in the mind, you begin to understand that there can be levels of infinity. There can be more than what I thought. I thought at first there was an infinite in this direction. Then I found out there's an infinite in that direction also. So it seems to me, at least, in cardinality, they're the same, as it turns out. It doesn't matter. But there's higher levels of infinity. So this all is in mathematics. You can't talk about the infinite in the exact sciences, in Bina, in understanding. There is no infinite there. You can't talk about an infinite quantity. You can't talk about infinite energy. You can't even go in the other direction and talk about the infinitesimally small in exact sciences. Because then you get the Planck constant, that's like the lower limit of matter, and then of energy, and you just can't go any lower than that. So there's no infinity there. So that's the idea, same as an example of what we mean, that Chokhmah is able to contain infinity to some degree, and even to a few degrees. Wisdom, because it's related to mathematics, is like that. But understanding, Bina, which is like exact sciences, doesn't have this idea of infinity. In fact, that's where evolution falls apart, but we're not going to get into that. Because evolution requires an infinite amount of time, and so you can't do that in the exact sciences. In any case. מה שאין כן בינה, השגת הדבר באורך ורוחב בבחינת יש, ואין בה התגלות אור אינסוף כל כך שהוא למעלה מהשגה. So in Bina, in understanding, we can't have the revelation of the infinite. It's always a finite perception of life, of godliness, whatever it is. והחוכמה מתייחדת עם בינה, שנמשך מן הגילוי אור אינסוף בהשגה על ידי שבילים נדיעים, כידוע בעניין למד ב' ויאמר אלוקים, דמתפתחן למד ב' שבילים מאבא לאמא. But there's a relationship between wisdom and understanding. We know that they're related. First of all, Zohar says they're always together. They're like two companions that never part. Okay. But that doesn't explain how they affect one another. And the way they affect one another is, we learned this from the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah, and he notes that there are, and this is an amazing thing, I mean, you would have to ask, if this wisdom is from Abraham, so how does he know this next piece of information? He says there are 32 pathways of wisdom. He doesn't say what they are. It's very rudimentary there. But then the later sages came, the time of the Mishnah apparently, or maybe even before then, and they came and said, and you know what, I think it's even written in Sefer Yetzirah itself, but I don't remember. And then that presents a question, how did Abraham know this? He says there's 32 mentions of the name Elokim, God's name Elokim, in the account of creation, the first account of creation, the first chapter. First chapter was Shabbat. 32 times Elokim. Here it says Vayomer Elokim. It doesn't have to be Vayomer Elokim. It's just Elokim, 32 times. And these are the 32 pathways of wisdom. Why? Because the name Elokim is not related to wisdom. So why are there 32 pathways of wisdom? So the explanation is, there's 32 pathways of wisdom, even though the name of wisdom is not Elokim, because Elokim is the name of understanding. And so here wisdom is giving to understanding, and it's called that there are pathways between the mind and the heart. The mind is like where wisdom is, and the heart is where understanding is. We have this statement that we say every Erev Shabbos, Bina liba uva lev mevin, that understanding is somehow in the heart. Now, it's not the physical heart, obviously, but it's the spiritual heart. That's where understanding is. When we say someone understands something, we mean that they took it to heart. When we say somebody is wise, we mean that they have a wise mind. We don't necessarily mean that they take it to heart. So they affect one another. So the infinite that's inserted into wisdom now is given to understanding. And that's the relationship between them. And these are called the 32 pathways between the father and the mother, between wisdom and understanding. ואז נמשך מהם מוחים חדשים לזון, שהם בחינת המידות, חסד וגבורה, דהיינו הטעם והשכלה למידות, על פי השגה באור אין סוף. And then when there is companionship, when there is unification between wisdom and understanding, between Ima and Abba, the father and the mother, it gives rise to new emotions in the person, new character traits. These new character traits, they're the character traits of hopefully the divine soul. Because hopefully what the wisdom that you received is wisdom of Torah. And so when the wisdom of Torah was taken to heart and you understood it fully, and when you do this when you pray, when you daven. Davening is a time in which the infinite light that's in wisdom descends down into the heart. And we need to explain that a little bit more, but that's the basic concept of what the sages say, that the time that you pray is the time of working in the heart, avodah shebalev. You're working in the heart. What are you doing in the heart? You're integrating whatever you learned before into feelings, into emotions, into a way of being. It's not just cerebral, it's not just intellectual. It becomes how I see the world, how I feel about the world, how I feel about people, how I feel about nature. And when this happens, so these new emotions, these new character traits that are created, they become the character traits of what we call the divine soul. And they have a tam vaskala. They have some sense in the infinite because they started from wisdom and understanding. The other character traits that I have that come from my animal soul do not have an understanding, they don't have a perception of the infinite. So let's give an example, because all these things need to be explained. He doesn't explain them here, they're explained in other places. If someone is not learning Torah and he's not developing character traits that descend from his divine soul, he's always limited in his perception of reality, meaning he'll always do things, he'll always see things from the very minimal perception of the limited being that he is now. He won't be able to see beyond. Even for people to begin to understand that there's an infinite soul, let's say that there's a soul that continues after a person passes away, that's a tremendous change in attitude. Where did that change in attitude come from? Because he suddenly realized, wait a minute, there's something beyond the finite. I'm not just the finite being that I am. I mean, I'm not just the thing that needs to, and people have understood this for eons. Since when did they understand it? We say that they began to understand in the second generation of mankind. In the generation of Enosh, third generation actually, the son of Seth. Why did he understand it? Because they saw that Seth was in the place of Abel who was murdered. What do you mean? They realized that there's something that moves. Yes, it's a different body altogether, and yet he's exactly the same person that my murdered uncle was, or my murdered father's uncle was. And when they saw this, they realized that there is a spirit that goes beyond the body. And the moment that you break out of that, you break out of that mold that it's only my physical self which is going to live 70, 80, 90 years, your considerations become different. Now you can take it to a negative extreme, which is what fundamentalist Islam does. What does it do? It tells you, everything that's here is meaningless. And that's nonsense. But because you lost this world, and you're going to make other people lose this world. And this world is very precious. Life in this world is the most precious thing because I have a chance to serve God. But that's why it's avodah zarah. That's why fundamentalist Islam, by definition, is idolatry. Because they worship something that is not true altogether. They worship the world to come. You don't worship the world to come.
They worship
the afterlife.
Yeah, the world. Yeah, right.
They worship it.
Yeah.
And that's idolatry. That by definition is idolatry because you lose this world. And the whole point of religion, the whole point of understanding this is that I need to use this lifetime to do things that will have infinite impact afterwards. They don't just end now. I'm doing something that has more meaning. So the moment that I switch out of this narrow view that all my life is just my being the way I am now, the moment I understand that, that's my divine soul. That's my divine character. I begin to act in a different way with different considerations. That can only come from mother and father uniting and giving birth to new midot, new character traits. And these character traits, they become zun. He calls it zer, anpin, v'nukva. They become the new small continents and his feminine counterpart. דהיינו, הטעם וההשכלה במידות לפי השגה ואור אינסוף. ולזאת בכדי שיהיה ייחוד דאבא ואמא, צריך להיות הערה חדשה בהחוכמה מאור אינסוף, שהוא למעלה מהחוכמה. For this to happen, for this unification to happen, the wisdom has to receive new light, new revelation from the infinite. How do you receive something from the infinite? We're finite. How am I going to receive something from the infinite? So what he's going to say now is that that's what you receive when you sanctify God's name. When you sanctify God. So what the Arizal said, that the yichud of Abba ve'ima, the unification of father and mother, happens also by some kind of feminine waters rising, meaning some awakening from below, by feeling sacrifice. Feeling as if you're willing to sacrifice yourself. Now, in the case of really the sacrifice that the 10 martyrs did, it became an actual sacrifice. By us, it's just what we do by Kriyas Shema. And that awakens new understanding, new wisdom, a new light in wisdom, a new infinite light, and it causes it to unify with understanding. So we have to end now, because I have to go.